Good morning. Welcome to Your Personal Health. I'm Jeff Harrison. We're just waiting for Dr. Kim and Dr. Burris to come in from the other show. They run just a few minutes late. But today we kick off week 2 when we're talking about sleep. Now, last week we talked about the side effects of not getting enough sleep, what it does to you emotionally, physically, spiritually. And if you miss that, go check it out. It's both on the Facebook and on YouTube. This week we're going to talk about, hey, what are some of the common causes of getting poor sleep? Because, like almost anything, if you have a weed in your yard and you just cut the top of it off, it's still growing down below. Well, we want to get to the root cause so we can eliminate and help the people watching get better sleep. And part of that is getting to what are the common causes. So I see Dr. Burris and Dr. Kim are both here. Let's go ahead and bring them in.
Hey, Jeff.
Good morning. Good morning. Are you there?
Yes. Good morning.
Okay, good. I wasn't sure. I'm going to change that background. It looks like I've got a cat on the top of my head. And I'm just going to change that real quick. As cute as it is. There we go. I like that. So, last week we talked about sleep and the side effects of not getting enough sleep. So this week I really want to kind of open that lid and say, okay, if we see all the negative downsides of not getting enough sleep, and we talked about that window of 6 to 9 hours, and some people have more, some people have less based on their age, where they're at in their lives. I want to get to what are some of the common causes of poor sleep.
So I'm just going to grab the bull by its horns and talk about, I think, the biggest one for me, if that makes sense. And that is going all day long, 150 miles per hour, with constant noise and people talking to me and kids and making dinner and work. And then when it's bedtime, rushing to get the kids to bed. Maybe I'm checking Facebook, maybe I'm checking the news, maybe I'm answering emails, maybe I'm finishing up some work notes. And then all of a sudden, boom, I'm supposed to go to sleep because it's midnight and I'm exhausted and I know I have to get up at 6. So I'm like, oh boy, I better go to sleep. And I turn off my screen and I lay my head down. And honestly, if I'm exhausted enough, I can still go to sleep. But there was a time where as soon as I laid my head down, I started to think either about all the things that were going on that day, or that problems that I had that I was worried about, things that I had to do the next day. And it's like my brain was still going 150 miles an hour, even though I had told it is now time to sleep. And I was exhausted. So during that time, what I recognized is that your brain actually needs time to process everything that happened in the day. And if you don't take that time to allow it to go through that process during the day, it'll keep doing it while you're trying to go to sleep. And that often will keep people up. Sometimes people will notice that their brain just won't shut off, and they'll talk about they're not worried, they're not thinking about anything that's bothering them. It's just their brain is just on. What?
You took your glasses off.
I know.
So with that, yeah, that got me nervous when we took our glasses off. I thought it was going to get really
right. I'm like,
now what I'm thinking. So I get that. We really haven't given ourselves a time for our brain to slow down. And I just had this vision of, when you're on a plane and it's in flight, it's flying at its cruise speed and altitude. But when we start to think about landing, what do? We put the flaps down, we slow the speed of the down, and we land so that we have a nice, smooth landing. What kind of things can we do to start kind of creating the cabin, our brain, if you will, for landing so we can slow it down and get ready for sleep?
So there are some really simple things that you can do to do this. And one is um, to basically recognize that you need this time for your brain to process and just schedule it in. And the ideal way to do this, honestly, in our busy lifestyles is to combine it with some sort of exercise because that also benefits our sleep patterns. So, one of these ways is going for a walk or a run, especially if this is done at a time where it's not right before you go to sleep. You don't want to exercise cardio wise right before you go to sleep because that kind of gets your adrenaline going. But if you can do this a couple hours before your bedtime, it really helps. Um, so, say it's not working out that night and you're not going to go to sleep, and say you only have 15 minutes. Honestly, turning off all your devices and taking a long shower or a bath, or even just sitting in a room by yourself or sitting outside on the porch, 10 minutes, 15 minutes is sometimes enough to let things kind of settle down and let your brain kind of just wander and think about what it's going to do. Um, Another thing that I highly recommend is prayer practice or meditation. For people who have a prayer life, they find that their stress hormone levels are lower and their blood pressures really calm down during that time too. So that's another practice that allows your brain to kind of consolidate the things that are happening and also um, deal with some of that may be on your, kind of weighing you down on your mind, on your heart, or just sort of causing you some your brain to kind of spin.
I'm kind of a more of a simpler approach kind of a person. And I think part of the problem, like you said, is everyone's trying to squeeze in 100 hours of stuff in a 24-hour period. And that's just not going to work. And so, for me, my advice would be is you have to reevaluate what you're trying to do in terms of your goals and then back that up into, well, what does that mean on a day-to-day basis? I'm a big believer of Stephen Covey and his big rock principles, and you can only manage certain amount of big goal tasks that you can break down and say, okay, today, how am I moving this goal forward? Because we're always trying to put fires out. But is it your fire or is it someone else's fire? And it tends to be other people's fires we're always putting out, so we can never get to our own things. And one of them has to be, like you said, yourself, which he calls sharpening the saw. If you're a saw and you're cutting wood all day long, if you don't sharpen yourself, you're never going to cut the wood anymore. And that's what we just talked about. Prayer, meditation, exercising, eating right, taking that time to slow down so that you can fit all these things. Because I think once we think about moving these things, at least for me, I get less stressed when I realize, okay, these are the big goals that I'm moving forward. And I'm not feeling like they're not getting moved because I'm doing these 10 other things. Not that you couldn't or shouldn't do those things, but at least you're planning your big goals. And that to me is how you can de-stress your brain so that at night you're like, oh, I actually did something that I wanted to do that I know that was important, rather than feeling like, okay, at the end of the day, I did something I know, but
what was it? And
yeah.
was it what I needed to be doing?
Right. So my brain can shut down a little bit.
Right. Another tool that people can use is sometimes people will think of something that they need to do the next day, and it'll keep them up because they're worried they'll forget. And, I'm definitely in this category. So if you're having that issue, it can be very helpful just to put a piece of paper and a pencil by your bedside. So if you think of something like that you want to make sure you remember the next day, you can just write it down. And then that gives your brain permission to move on and relax. So for people who are having that particular issue, that's one way around that. That also can be really useful for creative people who come up with great ideas in the middle of the night, and they wake up and they're like, oh, these are great song lyrics, or this is a great solution. Just to have that piece of paper there so they can quickly jot it down can help you remember it the next day.
You're dating yourself. There are things called smartphones that you can.
Okay, but if you turn on your smartphone, now you're dealing with blue light. So now that leads us into maybe it's better not to turn on your smartphone to jot something in your notes section. Maybe it's better to write it on a pencil and paper.
Record.
Okay.
All right, never mind.
Okay, so I hear you saying it's like sometimes we just have so much going on. Is it a situation we think that we just have to get it all done, and so there are no start and stops? It's almost like there was a day when somebody said, "Hey, what do you work?" Well, I work from 9 to 5. I work from 8 to 4, whatever it is. It feels like the boundaries of life and work are so blurred that we have gotten to the point we have trained our brain that we're always on. How much does that play into a factor of not being able to sleep properly?
I think probably more than we realize. Thinking about the ties, for those of us that are old enough, where there were no such things as pagers or cell phones. So when you, for instance, when you left home, no one could get a hold of you until you came back. Or when you left your job, they could call you at home, but that was considered, a matter of extreme rudeness. And so it would only be done in an emergency. I remember when people would never call during the dinner hour because the expectation was that people would be eating dinner and everyone recognized that that was sort of time for family. So you wouldn't want to interrupt them. All those things are gone. Now we live in a world where it's not unusual for people to get texts from their bosses late at night, or no one would think anything about texting a friend or calling a friend at 6 o'clock at night. I mean, that's very common. And it's this concept of like constantly needing to be available to everyone that is very overwhelming. And our nervous systems are just not designed to take all of that in all the time.
Yeah, I think as technology continues to advance, it's good, but the downside is, how many emails do people have to go through? How many text messages do they have to answer? How many phones do people carry? Because I have a business phone and my own personal phone. And I think there are a lot of different management systems out there, like Getting Things Done and Stephen Covey. But picking one of those to help manage your life, I think, will help people get more sleep, and because you're going to manage the information overload that you're getting.
And I'd like to point out that technology makes this more pervasive, but it was also possible before technology because I was the master of it in college. I actually had 15 hours a week of meetings to coordinate all of my extracurricular activities. So imagine if I had 15 hours of organization, I had like 30 hours of extracurriculars on top of a full-time college schedule. And this was all without cell phones, right? So that is a level of overscheduling that prevents you from proper rest. And if you're not getting proper rest during the day, it actually interferes with your ability to have good sleep. So exercise, proper downtime, and then I mentioned the blue screen thing before. I mean, this is a big deal. People now have like blue light glasses or apps to try to decrease that. What is this blue light thing and how does it affect sleep?
Well, so the blue light affects your ability to, I believe, serotonin. Is that correct?
No.
I think
That's
it.
why I asked you.
Great. No, I do think the blue light affects your ability to produce certain hormones that allows you to go to sleep. And I was going to say a little niche segment. So many kids are gaming now, and all these games are designed to increase your adrenaline level, stress level, even Candy Crush, right? I got to do this, I got to do that. And it's so hard to wind down once you've, done this. So gaming right before sleep, probably not a good idea. Not has to do with the blue light, right? But I think the blue light affects your ability to produce certain hormones that get you ready for sleep.
Actually, I do think it was melatonin.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, so it signals your brain that it's daytime and it's time to be awake. So we want to, our brain has this certain rhythm, and it's very interesting because you can study the effect in people who are blind because the brain is not receiving inputs from the eyes about the different lighting conditions, and they actually have different circadian rhythms. So the light is a clue to our brain that it's time to get up and work or it's time to go to sleep. And so when we have a lot of light stimulation to the eyes and the retina, it sends it to the brain and it says, it's wake up time, it's wake up time. And the more of that you have right before bed, the harder it is for your brain to switch into that sleep mode. And so that's why the recommendations are not to use screens of any type for about an hour before you go to bed to prevent that disruption. Sometimes that is not practical, but I would say as much as possible to try to honor that and recognize that it can be part of that disruption.
And what do you think about some of the more medical common causes of sleep?
So the other things that really can cause sleep disruption, we probably hear about sleep apnea a lot, but it's because it's very common. Sleep apnea is a condition where when somebody falls asleep, the tissues in their airway, around their airway, relax and actually block the flow of air. And one of the symptoms of that is snoring, but that's snoring by itself is not sleep apnea. Sleep apnea is when you actually stop breathing for a while. And then in order to breathe again, you wake up, the tissues regain some of their former tenseness and opens up your airway. So people who have sleep apnea will not get deep sleep because they're being woken up multiple times a night in order to breathe. And this has multiple bad effects because when you stop breathing for, say, 30 seconds or a minute, your oxygen levels drop. That stresses you out, that raises your adrenaline levels. It's almost like you're being choked multiple times a night. And so your adrenaline levels are running high all night long, which raises your blood pressure, which puts extra stress on your heart. So people who have sleep apnea, actually, if it's not treated, have a much higher risk for heart disease and high blood pressure, heart attacks, and even early death. So sleep apnea is not just about being tired. What are some signs that people can look for to know that they may have sleep apnea?
Number one, a cranky spouse.
Yes.
Because it typically goes with snoring. It doesn't always have to, but typically it's a snorer who snores loud. But that aside, excessive daytime sleepiness, and that's important because these are people that get into more car accidents because they're falling asleep at the wheel. Headaches, frequent headaches, poor concentration, like you said, resistant hypertension, meaning high blood pressure that you're on 2, 3, 4, 5 medicines and no one knows why. There are a lot of other reasons why that could be, but that's one of them. And so those are pretty much the big ones.
I also I want to put in there that falling asleep all over the place in odd situations, waking up feeling exhausted, like you haven't slept at all, even after what seems like it should have been a good night's sleep.
Right.
And then it tends to happen to people over time, especially if they're gaining weight, because the extra tissue in the airway can compress the airway a little.
Right.
However, sometimes it happens to people even who are thin. So it's important to know that it can happen to anyone.
Right.
So just because you don't think of yourself as being high risk, if you're having those symptoms, it's really worth talking to your doctor about it.
Right. And then another one is, mental health disorders, depression, anxiety. Those are pretty typical for sleep disruption. Drinking, alcohol, you mentioned, will disrupt your sleep. And then there's things like diabetes that don't necessarily affect the sleep, but you're getting up so many times to pee in the middle of the night, you're effectively not getting good sleep.
Well, and that also leads to things like interstitial cystitis,
Right.
which is an inflammation in the bladder, or prostate enlargement, which is very, very common.
Right.
And will lead to men getting up at night multiple times and really disrupting their sleep.
Right.
This is also a risk because as you get up more and more often at night, you increase your risk for a fall or an injury, especially as people are elderly. We want to take a look at how much they're waking up.
I think this is great because we're focusing on what causes someone may be experiencing that has poor sleep. And we talked about, from a work related issue to a no boundaries issue to medical. I have another question. What role does inconsistency in bedtime have? You talked about circadian rhythm, and sometimes, I often remember the example of someone who, they worked the night shift, 11 to 7 in the morning, and they did this for a long period of time, and then they switched to a daytime, and they had a horrible time getting to sleep at night. How much does inconsistency in bedtime really play in poor sleep?
It can play a significant role, especially if you're having a lot of inconsistency from day to day. Um, we've all experienced the effects of like jet lag, where you switch your time zones, and or say you make a switch in a work schedule from one shift to another. Um, those things, you notice the effects, but they gradually go away over a week or two because you are having a new consistent routine. The problem is when you never establish a routine at all and it's always different. Um, and this can happen with people who have, again, too much on their plate, or maybe they have a gaming thing and they're up very late some nights, and some nights they go to bed early because they're so tired. So if you're having difficulties sleeping, one of the first things that we do is something called sleep hygiene. And that means setting some things up intentionally to maximize your chances of having a good night's sleep. And the first thing that we do is set a wake up time and a bedtime and try to keep those very consistent, within a half an hour of each other. Also, this is something that we do to help our patients who have migraines. Um, Almost everything that we do to set sleep hygiene also helps for our patients with migraines to help prevent headaches. And migraines are a neurologic headache, so they're combined with the way the brain works. So, setting that good, um, very consistent bedtime is super helpful, but it's also helpful to have a consistent wake up time. So if you're getting enough sleep, you shouldn't need to sleep in one day an extra 4 hours if you're getting it routinely every night.
Well, this has been very enlightening because today we're talking about this is really in a series of we're talking about sleep because it is such a critical component to one's health. And if you know, it reminds me of a study I just read over the weekend, and they talked about the impact of our mental state, a positive mental attitude, and what it does, and actually adds 7.6 years to one's life. Those people they tracked like 600 people over their lifetime, and found that the people who had positive thoughts. So that's why I ask if we can get to the root causes of what may be causing the poor sleep. And then in the next few weeks, with Dr. Burris and Dr. Kim's help, we're going to start laying out some ideas like the sleep hygiene, which I think is brilliant. That's a great place to start. And really talk about, hey, here are some things that can help you get sleep because it does play such an important role. And we talked about that a couple of episodes ago about, obesity, stress, and other physical issues. It plays such an important role, but sometimes we don't realize it until, as we say, sometimes the boat is so far down the river we can't recover. This is where we want to catch you is early on and help you get there. Dr. Burris, Dr. Kim, I want to throw out some things that I know as a kid growing up that, hey, if we do a couple things, it helps with sleep. But really today is about uncovering those things that are causing the poor sleep. And you said, hey, give yourself some time to slow down because you're on go all day long. Create a quiet place. If your brain is running, put a pad next to or try to avoid the cell phone, and put a pad and paper next to your brain or your bed. So when your brain does wake you up, you can write it down, get it out of your head, so you can go back to sleep and not think about it for the next 30 or 40 minutes or several hours. The other thing is prayer, meditation. Those are great practices to help. Again, it sounds like all these are doing one consistent thing. And Dr. Kim, Dr. Burris, you're the experts. I'm just surmising this is it's slowing our brain down from going 100 miles an hour during the day. And that's really what we want to do. And then we talk about capping that in with being consistent when you wake up and when you go to bed. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's a great summary.
Great, great. And one thing I did forget is, and this is harder, is turning off those screens an hour before you get ready to go to bed. Boy, that's tough because I know I've looked over and my wife, she's got on those special blue light glasses. And first time she had them on kind of freaked me out, but now she wears them all the time. And better yet, just turn the things off. I guess the other thing is, I remember the story, and I'm sorry for talking so long, but I remember the story of a man, every time he went to read, he always went to his bedroom and laid down on the bed and he always fell asleep. The reason is because his bed was designed to sleep, not to watch Netflix. No offense to Netflix. So maybe there's another thing is, are we using our bedroom to do extra work and to catch up on emails and things of that nature, and almost training our mind to think, when we lay down, it doesn't mean we're supposed to go to sleep. Is that possible?
Correct. No, that's part of the sleep hygiene, that there's only 2 activities recommended for bed. So,
well, I can't even imagine what those 2 are, but I imagine one is sleep. We'll get into that next week. Dr. Kim, Dr. Burris, as always, you guys are amazing. We're reaching the top of the hour there. Any last thoughts before we wrap up today?
No, I think this is an important subject. It's, we're looking at it in its, singularity, but it is, like we've been mentioning it's just part of an overall, lifestyle that's healthy is one component. So.
Yeah, sleep is so foundational to the rest of our health that I'm glad we're spending more time on it.
I appreciate it. And thank you so much for doing that, spending time on it. If you missed this, go back and rewind it, share it with a friend, somebody you know that may be having trouble with sleep, and just have them look through it. Even put it on 1.5x speed and get to the good stuff, which every word coming out of Dr. Burris and Dr. Kim's mouth is the good stuff. You can speed through mine at 2x and write down the things that are going to make a difference in your life, because at the end of the day, no sleep, well, it's not the best thing for us. It's like we can go a little while without water and food, but eventually it's going to catch up with us, gang. So get your sleep, look and see what's going on, and then join us next week when we talk about, hey, what are some of the things you can start doing to create that safe space, create that quiet place, get the better sleep hygiene, and start getting your sleep under control. Thanks for joining us. I'm Jeff Harrison, and
I'm Dr. Burris.
And I'm Dr. Tim.
all right, we'll see you guys next week. Take care.